Well, another very warm welcome back, all my vintage dirt bike loving YouTubers, and thanks to you all once again for retuning to my classic dirt bike TV channel. And of course, thanks also for the many, mainly positive comments that you're leaving on my video postings. Now, this is just a little heads up as to some of the things that's coming up here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. Now, in the next couple of weeks, we will be heading south to Kendal to cover the Westmoreland Motor Club's 2-day event. Now, this will be a full 2 days of vintage racing, and mainly CCM racing in particular, and also at this event some of the old CCM riders from way back in the day will be in attendance. So of course all the racing, all the bikes and everything else that went on during the course of the 2 days will be posted here on my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel soon after, so don't miss it. Okay, the week after, which will be the 4th of July, we will be heading to the Scottish borders once again, to Thornhill in Dumfries to be more precise, to cover round 2 of the Scottish Classic Motorcycle Racing Club's event. Another good day of classic racing, and as usual you will see all the bikes and all the racing from that event also here on my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel. So in order that you don't miss out on any of these events coming up, please consider subscribing to my channel. Okay, we're going to continue looking at old classics once again, and this time we're delving into the Terry Pickering Classic Dirt Bike collection once again. And in this next video posting, we're going to take a look at Terry's lovely 1979 RM125 Suzuki Twinshocker. Now, normally when I'm doing a photo shoot on these kind of classic dirt bikes, I usually like to get the bikes outside to shoot pictures and video clips, although the weather at the time when I arrived at Terry's was absolutely horrendous, so we had to make do with Terry's workshop here as a makeshift studio. Now, the story of this particular little RM125 was basically that this was a bike that Terry acquired some time ago, and it was basically just boxes of parts that were for some strange reason stored in the loft of some office premises. Now, as to why an old twin-shock dirt bike was found in the loft of an office building, I'm not entirely sure, although Terry then just handed all of the boxes of parts to his bike building mechanic Keith Ree, who, as you know, has restored many of these old race bikes for Terry in the past. And of course, Keith was also a works rider for Michael and Kramer back in the day, so this little RM125 was going to be Keith's latest project to add to Terry's collection when it was finished. But as you can see, Keith's made a cracking job of bringing this little Suzy 125 back to life, and every single part on this bike has been meticulously inspected and then refurbished to make it look like brand new once again. Now, when these RM125s came out in 1979, they were a completely brand new model for that year and had almost no resemblance to the previous 1978 bike. Now, the chassis was beefed up and made stronger for 1979, and new and tougher foot pegs were also bolted on, and this 79 bike had longer travel suspension and a redesigned engine cradle. Now, of course, the motor was a single-cylinder two-stroke with reed valve fuel induction, and the bike also had a 6-speed gearbox and the standard wet multi-plate clutch. Now, as I remember, I think these 125s had a bore and stroke of about 54mm, and the standard carburetor fitted at the time was a 32mm Mikuni. Now, the sparks for the engine were supplied by Suzuki's PEI unit, or Pointless Electronic Ignition, if you want to give it its full title. And I think the clutch and ignition covers on these bikes, as I recall, were also made of that light weight saving magnesium. But these were cracking little motors for such a small 125cc bike, and the engine's sweet spot was right in the middle of the mid-range, which was where this engine gave its best performances. But these 125s were very popular with the younger riders in 1979, although maybe they weren't the quickest 125 of that year, but the bike had a good chassis, decent suspension, and if you were prepared to dance up and down on that quite smooth 6-speed gearbox, then you could certainly attain decent results against the equivalent CR Hondas or KX Kawasaki's of their day. Now also the cooling fins on the cylinder barrel and the head were also made bigger for these 1979 bikes, just to try and dissipate the heat from the cylinder more efficiently. Now once again, on the front end of these RMs we had a set of 38mm Kayaba forks, which were quite beefy for a little 125 motocross machine, and these gave the rider just over 11 inches of travel at the front end. Now some adjustment could be made to the forks by adding or removing low pressure air through the Schrader valves on the top of each fork leg. Although these drum brakes had certainly enough stopping power if you needed to slow the little RM into a turn. Now once again, replacing the old steel swing arm from the previous model, these alloy box section swing arms were brand new for the 79 RM125, and they were very light and of course very strong, and they were also fitted with this top chain guide as well as your standard guide that was normally fixed to the lower part of the swing arm. And although this was still an older twin shock type of setup, that still worked very well on this little RM125. Although you can see that Keith's done a first class job of refurbishing this bike, and many of the parts certainly look like brand new, but then again, that's always the problem when Keith restores a bike, because you can hardly ever tell which parts have been refurbished and which are actually new replacement parts. Now once again, another good stopper on the back here of this RM125, and of course it wouldn't be too long before Suzuki began fitting hydraulic disc brakes to their future motocross machines. Now back in 1979, Suzuki would have fitted a pair of Kayaba rear shocks to these RM125s that also had remote reservoirs, although I'm not entirely sure if these are the originals, although they do look period correct, I have to say. Now once again, this exhaust expansion chamber looks like almost new, as it has very little in the way of damage to it, with the usual dings or dents associated with these exhaust systems. But then again, Keith's more than likely worked his magic on this part during the restoration process. Now this quite nice looking alloy tailpipe is of course a brand new replacement for the original black mild steel item, although this Evo tailpipe looks much better and again is a lot lighter than the 79 original part. Now this plastic Suzuki fuel tank has almost certainly undergone the Keith Ree treatment, as of course Keith specialises in restoring old and faded motorcycle plastics, and often after this process the items can look sometimes better than brand new, as you can see here. And this fuel tank would have held about just over 6 litres of fuel back in 79. Now once more, the seats that were fitted to these little RM125s were said to be among the best in their class for 1979, and that was one of the factors of many of the 1970s motocross racers, was that they all had quite decent seats, and if you ever got the chance to rest your backside for a second during a race on this little RM125, then this was still quite a nice place to rest it, that's for sure. Now, as far as I know, these handlebars, grips and the levers and cables are all period correct items for the RM125. Now, whether they're all original, I'm not entirely sure, but they certainly look right for the bike, with those quite nice looking triple clamps and of course handlebar clamps. Now, also fitted to this little RM125 is a nice alloy bodied Swedish Gunnar gasser, just to help try and control the reputed almost 22 horsepower that was said to be put out by that 125 Suzuki two-stroke motor. Now, these ball end levers are again period correct for the 1979 bike, and as is this front number plate plastics. Now, the very first 1979 Suzuki 125s that were released for sale actually had a weird square duck-billed type rear mudguard fitted, which looked quite hideous if truth be known, and it was just months later that Suzuki then changed it for this more conventional, and it has to be said, much more pleasing rounded shape. But with regards this little RM125's performance, it's quite hard to find anyone who had a bad word to say about these RM125s from back in the day, as most riders who raced them thought that they were pretty awesome little racers. Okay, they weren't perfect by any means, and they had their share of niggles, just as every other off-road race bike has, but what the bike had was a decent chassis, a very good set of suspension on both the front and the rear, and of course that superb two-stroke motor that could rev to the moon and back. And if you were prepared to keep that motor buzzing and then short shift that 6-speed gearbox, then this little screamer could certainly take on any Yamaha, Honda or Kawasaki of equivalent size. Although at the end of the day, when you consider that this little bike was just boxes of old parts in the loft of an office building, then I'm sure you'll agree that Keith has made a fantastic job of restoring this little machine, and this will certainly of course be another welcome addition to Terry's fantastic collection of old vintage scramblers. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little walk around Terry Pickering's lovely 1979 Suzuki RM125N, little twin shocker. Not a bike that you see too readily on the racetracks these days, but it's nice to take a look at one in such lovely condition. And of course, this bike is just one of many in Terry's collection, and we'll be taking a look at more of Terry's bikes in future videos here on Classic Dirt Bike TV. Okay, coming up in my next video, we will be showcasing another machine from Terry's collection, and this time it's the turn of this beautiful 1979 Maiko 125. Now, another rare machine from back in the day, and this one has been completely restored by Terry's friend Keith Ree, so we'll be taking a look at this bike in my next video posting. But until then, of course, everybody stay safe and well until we all get back together once again, and we'll talk more about this kind of vintage iron right here on your favourite Classic Dirt Bike TV channel.